to be another way to do it. Well, welcome to the recording, everyone, as I try to make my,
I'll pause it.
I don't know where
There we go. Okay.
All right, so governance, here are all the things that can make governance really super good. All of these are important. How you make your decisions. Are they consensus oriented, or are you just doing majority? I like consensus personally. Governance holds everyone accountable. It's transparent. People participate in the governance. When you're there at your board meeting, you're fully there. You have rules that you follow. You try to be both effective and efficient so that you stay on task, you get the work done, and you do it in an equitable and inclusive way. Everybody's voice is heard, and you are responsive to your members. So when you are in your board meeting, you've got you're going to make decisions, you have some choices about how you're going to decide things. So at Ashland Food Co-op, we just use Robert's Rules of Order. It's structured, it's a majority rule, but then we also worked on consensus with that. Policy governance is a more complicated way of governing yourself. You have ends policies, means policies, and it really makes that distinction between your management, operations, and the board of directors. Consensus is when everybody agrees to it. You can stand aside, or you can, if you want to, allow the minority to block the decision. So consensus, that how we use it with Robert's Rules of Orders, is that when we get down to making a decision, we must consent on it. If you can't, you can block if you want to, and then there's more discussion. But otherwise, you can also stand aside so that you let the decision be made, but you yourself make it be known that you're not down with that. I guess that would be modified consensus as well. And then dynamic governance, which includes sociocracy, that requires 100% buy-in. And I don't know very much about sociocracy, but John does. And is this where you want to talk about that?
I'll after you get through your thing, I'll do it.
Okay, good. All right. So every co-op needs to have governing documents, and these are the things that are required by law. Your articles of incorporation. There are templates out there that you can use, and there are bylaws. Those really govern everything that you do and addresses all of the things that have to do with governing your co-op. And then there are policies as well. Some of those policies might come from the management side as well, but if you're using policy governance, those policies are very critical. Your board of directors are the elected representatives of your membership. So whoever your membership is, whether it's workers or consumers, they're the ones that you go through an election process. They are the ultimate fiduciary people on of your organization. They create the policies, they provide the visioning, and they do have term limits. So 3 years is what it is at my co-op. John, is there a rule about how long term limits can go, or is that completely up to the co-op?
I think it's pretty much up to the co-op. There's no real rule set in stone or anything.
I've had the experience of having a board member on for 8 terms, and there is value in that. And there's also maybe a little bit of, I've been here too long. So think about your term limits when you are setting up your board of directors. Here are the fiduciary duties, the fiduciary duties is that you have the ultimate say over the finances of your co-op. And these are the things you want to make sure that you take care of your co-op, that you are loyal to your co-op, and that you are obedient to your co-op and to your duties. So being on the board, you do have a commitment to your organization that is deeper than just being a member. So duty of care, be prepared. When you come to a board meeting, read all the material that you've been given before you come to the board meeting so that you are equipped with the information that you're going to be discussing and the decisions that are going to have to be made. It might take you a day to do that. It might take you an hour, but be prepared when you come to your board meeting. And know that when you're at that board meeting, that if there's something that is confidential, please maintain that confidentiality. That's really important. Participate in your decision-making. Don't just sit back. Really engage and do your due diligence. Be loyal to your co-op, protect the interests of the members. The members are the lifeblood of your co-op, whether it's your workers or consumers or whatever sector you're in. The members really are the lifeblood. And it requires you to act in ways that are in good faith. And if you have a conflict of interest for any reason, let that be known. It's your duty to do that. It's your duty of loyalty to do that. And in terms of obedience, make sure that when you are doing your business as a board, that you follow your bylaws, your policies, and also all of the laws that are required. Oh, here's some board responsibilities. The board, I like to say that the board is like the Indian Scout of the co-op. They go up on the highest point on the hill and they look out over the horizon and try to anticipate what is coming down the pike. So that strategic and long-term planning is essential for a co-op, and that is one of the board's main responsibilities. And the board has usually one employee, and that is the administrator or the general manager. So that leader, that administrator gets to have a boss that is made up of many people. Being able to evaluate yourselves on an annual basis also is a responsibility of a board, because you want to make sure that y'all are aware that you're doing it the right way, that everybody is participating, you're following your bylaws, you're following your procedures, and take a critical look at that so that you can see where you can improve in the coming year. And set your governance policies. Decide how you're going to make decisions, whether it's policy governance or whatever. Learn how to do that and follow it in all of your meetings. And your members, again, are the lifeblood of your co-op. So do what you can to make sure that they're protected, that you're following all the laws, that the co-op is following all the laws, and that what you do is in the best interest of your membership. And be critical when you choose your board officers. Those board officer positions are the penultimate leaders on that board. And so you want to make sure that who you elect as your president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, that the treasurer knows how to handle the money, that the secretary knows about minute taking and keeping the records, that your vice president is going to be a good support and step in when the board president, who will run all the meetings and take that ultimate leadership role, that everyone is equipped to do those things. And know the finances in a way that you know when it's good to distribute member benefits, like a patronage dividend, and when it might not be. And that's when your treasurer and your financial manager will inform you on that. And that's a collegial kind of thing. And then it's in the best interest of the co-op and the members as well. And perpetuate, ensure future leadership. We're all responsible on boards to replace ourselves when it's time for our term to be over. And that makes it a lot easier. So you're not scrambling around to try to replace a board member that is ready to step off. It's just a good practice to make sure that everybody on the board has a hand in finding new possible board members for future leadership roles and for board president and other officers. Okay, so here's your basic officer things. Your chair, we kind of went over that. They can call special meetings. The vice chair is always the backup person. The secretary also can be a backup person, but the secretary has all these other sorts of record keeping duties and gets to sign things and make sure that the member records are protected, and that the co-op is doing all of the reports that they need to. And the treasurer is the keeper of the funds, the custodian of the funds of the cooperatives, and make sure that all of the other board directors understand the fiduciary responsibilities of the co-op. You can read the income statements and such. So here's a nice snapshot of everything that has to happen. Those things that we do together are in the pink. The things that the board does are on one side and management on the other. So there are some shared responsibilities between the board and the management. And we'll just keep going. I'm not going to read all that to you. You can see kind of how it's broken out. So here are the areas of responsibility. The board is governance, and the administrator or the manager is operations. You don't want to mingle that up too much. So good boards have a set of tools that they use. And in my board, we rotate meeting facilitation. Some boards, it's always the president that facilitates it. That's something that you get to decide, is how you're going to facilitate your meetings, and make sure that everyone on your board has some experience and some training in meeting facilitation. Board committees are essential because sometimes you can't do all of the work of the board just at board meetings. So at my co-op, for example, we have an owner engagement committee. We have a board development committee. We have a finance committee. And we, so in all those on all those committees, we do the work of making sure that our owners are engaged with our co-op, making sure that we're always looking at ways that we can develop our board, either through training or recruiting new members for our board. The financial manager of the co-op and the finance committee work hand in hand with also with the general manager to make sure that the board budget is correct and that it's followed and that everything is right at the end of the year. And then the board calendar is laid out so that you know what you can kind of map out the year for your board meetings so that you kind of have a template for the year so you don't have to say, what are we going to talk about at our board meeting this month? There will be things that will add on as you go along, but to have a board calendar keeps you very organized. You can break up into committees. Usually the board chair appoints people to those committees. And these are the places then where a lot of the work gets done outside of your meetings. So my co-op, for example, the owner engagement committee will meet outside the board meeting, and we'll work on ways that we can get more people to engage with our co-op in events, in shopping. How do we get the word out? How do we communicate with our community about the work of our co-op? Those are things that happen in board committees, and then you can you report back to the full board so that everybody knows what all the other committees are doing. And the use of an executive committee where you've got your vice president, your secretary, your treasurer, all doing their work before the board meeting is another good way to be able to make your board meetings quicker. Okay, the budgeting. You want to budget for all of the needs of your co-op and for your board. So the board usually holds an annual meeting with all of its members. So you might need to put aside some money for that. Board training is also essential. That is a great line item, and it's so essential because as you go along, you'll find out places where you're going to need a little more information. And believe me, the Co-op Development Center can certainly help you with that board training, and there are other consultants out there that do the same thing. Paying your board members a stipend is a good practice as well. Make sure you build that into your budget. And if you feel that you need outside facilitation, put that in there as well. And you can think of other things too. Here is a sample of a board calendar, and you can see how it is laid out. May and June, April, May and June, maybe not so much big stuff going on. Maybe you don't have a June meeting because it's summer and you don't need that meeting. Always celebrate October, National Co-op Month. Regardless of what sector you're in October, we all get to celebrate. And depending on when your election is held in your board calendar, you would recruit your board members in advance of that. It's kind of an ongoing thing, the recruitment of board members. So that relationship between board and management is critical. Like I said before, the board has one employee, and that is the manager. And that relationship is key to smooth operations. So it has to be professional. You need to respect each other. Both entities need a long view, and that trust that both the board and management are operating in the best interests of the co-op. There's a balance of influence there between management and the board, and maintaining that is, sometimes it's walking a fine line. Sometimes it's easy as cake. It just depends on the situation. But know that having that balance is important and something that you should work toward, as well as having this shared vision. If the board and the management don't have a shared vision of what the future of the co-op is, or how it should operate, what its purpose is, then there's going to be tension. So taking care of those things at the beginning and nurturing that shared and common strategy and vision will really make your co-op strong. Here's your basic organizational structure between empowerment and accountability. You can see membership is at the very top. The board represents the membership. The board has one employee. That one employee then supervises the rest. So here are some common board management conflicts. Favoritism, time off, pay and benefits, scheduling, discrimination. Just be aware of these, and if you have a good relationship with each other on the board and a good relationship with your general manager, these things won't be a problem for you. Just maintain good, clear communication. That's really key, I think. And now we have time for some questions about that. And we're all here to answer them for you. Me and John.
If people want to come off mute, feel free if you have any questions.
I'm going to stop my share now.
Hello. So we're just a 4-person co-op, or we will be. And do we need to elect ourselves to the board every year, or can it just be like the members are the board, or you know?
John, I think this is yours.
Okay, yeah, you can, especially as you're a smaller organization, simply say that all members are on the board. As you get bigger, you may change that, and you want to periodically maybe review your bylaws anyways every 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
There are some worker co-ops like Isthmus Engineering in Madison, Wisconsin, where they have 42 members and all of their members are on the board. And so it kind of depends also ideologically where you're at. Obviously, for Isthmus, they're kind of the way they work, it works out for them. So you just have to be a little conscious about what you're doing as directors. And
right. I think you have to remember what hat you have on. Right. So are you the worker owner or are you the board member? Right. So you have kind of a divided personality.
And then we'd all have an officership too. So we'd be simultaneously the worker owner, the board member, and the secretary or whatever.
Right. So you'd select who's officers for the year, and then maybe just instead of having your board elections, you would just do officer elections at the first board meeting of the year.
Yeah. Diane says that Country Natural Beef has over 100 members and they all sit on the board. Yikes. Yeah. That'd be a big board meeting.
And that kind of thing would be set up in the bylaws. So we just in the bylaws would just say all members are board members or whatever.
Yeah, and I think we could probably find some language from some of the ones that do that.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Maybe not such a quick question. Having to do with consensus models. My very cursory look at sociocracy seem to say that yes, it does require a consent, but that when people are in opposition, there's dialogue, and unless the objection really ultimately, when you get down to having answered all the questions and dealing with what could be an objection, when you get right down to it, the only objections that really remain valid objections are those that are people's concerns about whatever the proposal is. Maybe it's not consistent with the values, or maybe it's not consistent with the mission, or creates a financial situation that's not optimal, or those kinds of things. Could you both speak to that, as well as on a real practical level, how does it really work? You know, I mean, I read stuff and it all sounds lovely. But I know that in the real world, when you've rolled up your sleeves and you're in the middle of a discussion, how does it really work, and how can you be effective in it? And then the third part really has to do with the circle idea of management, where there's really the company is, or the organization is run by various committees, and board members aren't called board members, and they don't really have any power, but they're called owls, and they're there for purposes of maintaining, consistency with the bylaws and those kinds of things, but they're really not there. They're a resource. They're resources. They're not decision makers. That might be a little more than you want to get into, but those are the questions that I have.
Go, John.
Well, yeah, so I'm going to do a short presentation on sociocracy in maybe a few minutes, but just maybe get any other questions out of the way. I don't know, Annie, if you want to talk about consensus, not sociocracy, and how that works in practice.
Yeah. I've been on boards in both the nonprofit and co-op world, and my co-op board has always worked on consensus, and sometimes it does take a while. I think having a relationship, really a bond with your fellow board members, and a deep respect for your board members, one for each other, is essential, because there are going to be times when a decision is going to be contentious, and someone might block that, and then there might be some bad feelings about that. Humans are messy, and so are organizations. Democracy is messy. So it really comes down to a respect for each other, and not feeling bad or being judgmental if someone either blocks or stands aside. That there's acceptance that that's how it's going to be, and if someone is going to block it, then it's not time to make that decision, and move on to the next agenda item. I think that's how I have experienced it on the various boards that I've been on, and I have stood aside and I have blocked, and we still are friends. So again, humans are messy.
Yeah, I would say any process you use, it really you really need to engage co-op values and in it, and
Right.
especially values of openness and honesty, and really build trust. So if you don't have trust, it doesn't matter if you're using Robert's rules or consensus. It's 5-4 votes are not really a healthy organization, and because you have basically half of your board or group is not coming along with the decision, and so it's so I think thinking about all of that is that the decision, I think, is best when you've done the work beforehand, where the decision is just a formality.
Yeah.
And that so it takes time anyways to get to that point, especially if you're creating something really new or alien to the group. You need to take that time to bring people, educate, information.
Right. That's why board onboarding is so important.
Right.
Because every board has its own culture, and bringing a new person in, a new board member in, can be upsetting a little bit, because everyone's like, well, who is this new person? They just got elected. So yeah, human dynamics.
Yeah, and actually this kind of goes back to what Annie was talking about in terms. I 3 years is really a nice board term because it really takes like a year to learn the board. Whenever I come on a new board, I know the first year I'm just figuring out that group. The second year, you're more engaged, and by the third year, you're actually able to start coaching the first years.
Mhm.
And so that's why it really feels good. And then it's also not like you're having to lock in for the rest of your life.
Right. And stagger the terms so that you don't have turnover, mass turnover.
Right.
So when
Yeah.
you set up your board, you might have one person that's a 3-year, one person that's a 2-year, and
Yeah.
just so that you can keep the election cycle going, get that going.
Right. And so for you folks that sound audio with 4 people, you might even want to say a 3-member board just to give one person a year off every now and again.
Yeah.
And just rotate people through. Just, so it's not always so much, but that all depends on, thinking about it again is, you're setting up your culture now. And so as you're doing this, be conscious about that because it will outlive you in the organization. Great questions, Margaret. I'm going to try to get to the other 2 in a second here, but are there any other questions or reflections for Annie before we dive in? Okay, then I am going to share my screen, and I have to make sure I do this in the right order. Otherwise, okay. All right, I'm frozen now. Dang it. Okay, I'm just having my own tech problems now. So I think it's something about our governance session that we always tend to have the tech problems on. My apologies. I'm trying to get my screen up. Okay, there we go. Can people see my screen or hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Then, so sociocracy is also known as dynamic governance. I don't think either word is really very useful. I wish we could come up with a better word, maybe integrated governance or something. It's a model that is both governance and decision making, and also will a little bit blur kind of the lines of the role of governance and operations, which we tend to really historically have really separated. But it also operates on this catchphrase, good enough for now, safe enough to try. And I'm going to go through and give a explanation of the different parts of it. I feel sociocracy is actually really ideal for worker co-ops, but of course, over the next week or 2 and working with folks, you can examine what else you do. And also the vocabulary of sociocracy is there, and it can be a barrier for people. So feel free to be sociocratic in your own way and don't feel that you have to adhere to the gospel of the different things we'll be talking about today, or that you have to use the exact terminology. So moving forward. So what is sociocracy? And sociocracy is essentially, well, the word means people, right? Governance by people. And it's about working in an organization in which everybody that's part of the organization is engaged and participatory and doing only doing those things that they consent to. So it really gives agency to the individual person in an organization, but within the concept of mutual support and mutual aid that are those essential values of cooperation. So self-help, self-responsibility. I mentioned it's sometimes referred to as dynamic governance. It has basically 4 constructs to it: autonomous circles, double linking, rounds, and consent. I'm going to kind of go through these different parts of it, as well as also talk about some of the other names as well. Circles is the first one that you are more than welcome to change the word for. I have a group here in Olympia, Orchid Books. They're adopting sociocracy, but instead of circles, they're doing something that's more aligned with their branding. So they're calling their circles pods, Orchid Books pods. And other groups are doing different things. So you can think about, if you want to go this way, what are words that are going to bring this alive for your organization? That's what I think is really important. But let's talk about the circles. So this is the basic unit of operation in any sociocratic model. It's this is where the work gets done. It's where people doing similar work come together to agree on how to do the work. This is kind of where sociocracy engages in what is hierarchy, but the circles are about the job function. It's not about having power over others. It's having power with each other. And so we often say that in sociocracy, it's a hierarchy of work, not a hierarchy of power. We're going to talk a little bit more about aims, but every circle, so the organization itself has a vision and mission, and then each circle has an aim that is related to the vision and mission. And then within that, the decisions on how they do the work are related to that aim. And so when we're talking about paramount objections, and when we talk about that, that is what the paramount objection has to be, is that whatever is being proposed would undermine the aim of the circle. And that is the key reason why to object. Each circle has its own structure, internal structure. Usually, again, languages can be changed, but a leader, a delegate, a facilitator, and a note taker. Usually the leaders are chosen from a circle higher up, and the delegates are then elected from a circle from below. So say the board circle, they would elect a leader that would effectively be like the general manager, only they would be someone from the board circle that would then be the general manager. And meanwhile, the circle that the general manager oversees, of maybe all the other managers, they would also elect a manager up to the board. And then each circle has that same linkage all the way through. And we'll take a look at one of these a little bit later. Then each circle has a facilitator who's usually not either the delegate or leader. Of course, if you're smaller, these roles can flip around, and you might only have one circle as well. The facilitator's job is to coordinate the meetings, to set the agenda, to work with the leader to set the agenda, to run the meetings, and that's about it. The note taker, then, their job is like the secretary role of the organization, only their role is to do that within each circle. So these are the 4 fundamental positions. leader, delegate, facilitator, and note taker. You can choose other positions as you feel are needed. That would be a decision that the circle can make, but these are kind of the 4 core groups. And then a key thing is, I think a lot of people, when they hear about sociocracy or collectives, they think, oh my God, we're going to spend all of our time in meetings and we're never going to be able to do any work. And so it's really important to understand that circles are there not to meet for the fun of it. They're there simply to create the terms for the members of the circle to do their work. So it's not quite policy in the sense of what the board's creating, but it maybe you think of it as creating the standard operating procedures. So how, as you know, for a taxi cab company, it might mean that the dispatcher circle meets and determines how they're going to prioritize calls and dispatch rounds, right? But that's it. If they don't have to meet, then they don't meet. The other thing that circles will do will be to hear reports on the effect of their procedures and policies. Are these policies actually doing what they want them to do to meet the aims of the circle? And if not, do they need changes? So circles can meet weekly if they need to, if that's required. They can meet quarterly, or maybe even once a year. It kind of depends on what their area of focus is and how often that needs to be met. So for instance, you know, at Union Cab, we didn't have sociocracy and we didn't have circles, but we did have a sort of a team management. Our operations team met every other week, and a key part of its meeting was to review customer complaints. So because that was something that we did as a group, that had to happen on a regular basis, because you didn't want complaints to, you know, become too stale. You wanted to be able to respond and be proactive about it. So we met at one point even weekly, but then were able to get to by twice a week or twice a month as things change. And so the schedule of meeting can also change as well. The circles are there again to not to meet for the sake of meeting, but to actually coordinate the work of the group. So then vision, mission, aim, and domain. So the vision and mission is kind of common for most organizations. Mission would relate to in your articles of where you state the purpose of the organization. That's what you're telling the government, what the main focus of your business is. For those of you in the nonprofit world, this can be really important. The mission is how also you essentially determine your 501c3 status. So, you know, your mission is really important. You don't want to get too far away from it. But then the vision is kind of the bigger picture. What is the ultimate goal that you're trying to set out? So, you know, I think the classic one that I always remember is from Oxfam. Their vision was to end world hunger, right? That's their big goal. Then their mission is aligned with how do they get towards that vision. And the vision then is really about what is the purpose of the co-op to be doing. And you know, I think this is a great quote from previous student. Mission is what we work towards, what we see in the sunset, maybe what you email your funders or preach in the streets. It's the shared purpose of what people are doing. And this gets us back into the aims of the circle. So the aims are the specifics of how the mission will be achieved, right? So one way of saying is that the mission is what you're preaching in the street, but the aim is what you're telling your family what you actually do for a living. So aims should be tangible, they should be measurable, they should be really focused on the narrow area of what the domain is. And that brings us to the domain. So the domain is also about creating the boundaries of that circle, what are the specific areas of within the organization that circle is responsible for and has authority to decide without consent from others. So for instance, you know, just thinking about you know, a bakery, which we're going to use as an example. The bakers, you know, for their domain might include choosing the source for their flour, and maybe eggs and other ingredients. No one else in the co-op can tell the bakers what ingredients to use, what recipes to use. That is purely within their domain. And then for things that maybe involve more than one circle's domains, then that's where you go up to a higher circle. So each circle links into a higher circle. Then maybe if more than one circle has to be involved, that's where that gets sorted out along these same lines of working towards aims and mission of the organization. So another interesting thing, when we're going to get into consent here in a second, but one of the other neat aspects of sociocracy as it's practiced, and sometimes this breaks down a little bit. So, you also want to have, any facilitator wants to have a meeting that's engaging and where people are enjoying their time in the meeting. You don't never want it to feel like a drudge. But rather than using speaker stacks or lists or popcorn methods, so sociocracy defaults to this idea of using rounds. So you might, in Robert's Rules world, we sometimes refer to this as a round robin, where you suspend the rules for a little bit and you go around the circle and everyone has their say. This is the default for sociocracy. So each person in turn decided in a round decided by the facilitator is provided the opportunity to add their input. And usually it's focused into one core idea, and then you go around the rounds until everyone in the circle is complete with having expressed themselves. This allows people who tend to talk a lot to be able to sit back and listen. This also helps people who tend to not put their ideas out to have the opportunity to do so and to be given that space and support. And then, then using rounds, the circle creates policy by doing picture forming, by asking everyone to participate in creating the different aspects of what they're trying to be, what they're trying to address. And then ultimately the facilitator can offer a proposal, or maybe it'll be decided to have a helping circle, or other people go and actually craft the proposal from what they heard in the meeting and come back and then amend it. And then another key aspect, and this kind of gets into the good enough for now language. So the picture forming is about making it safe enough to try. And then the last part here is the good enough for now, is that generally speaking, almost all policies or decisions by any circle will have a review by date. So it'll be like, this policy is in effect for 6 months, and then we'll review it to see if it worked. So, think of it as a traditional scientific experiment where the proposal is the hypothesis, and then the circle puts into a process to test the hypothesis and then reviews it to see if the hypothesis was correct or not. And then move on to either continuing it and going forward, or making changes. And it's, I think, a good idea anyways to have these review dates, because we live in a very dynamic marketplace where things are constantly changing. And so even at Union Cab, we weren't using sociocracy, but we just fell into a pattern where every policy of the board of directors was reviewed every 2 years. And again, the bylaws might get a 5-year review and the articles might get a 10-year review, but it's good to have that built in so that for one, people who are not sure about the policy, this allows them some comfort to have buy-in, because when the review comes up and if things weren't working, they can say, okay, I gave it a chance, let's make some changes. But if it is working, then, they can feel that they're being heard as well. Then, of course, we always like to celebrate. So when consent is reached, to celebrate the fact that you've all reached consent. So what is consent? It's similar to consensus. I would even argue that it is a form of consensus. Sometimes in the world of collectives and sociocracy. There's heated battles over consent versus consensus, but I think it's essentially a form of consensus. It's a structured form, particular. So one of this is that proposals are usually created by the circle with all the members present. So if somebody isn't there, you have to accommodate for how consent can be reached with that. The people are asked if they consent. So in consensus, traditional consensus, usually the idea is, does everyone agree? So you ask if there are any objections or blocks, but in consent process, you don't ask if everyone agree. You ask them if that core question works for them. Is it good enough for now? Is it safe enough to try? So in consensus, everyone agrees. In consent, nobody objects. So that's kind of a fundamental way of thinking about it. The idea of a paramount objection, again, this means that a member of the circle believes that the proposal will cause the circle to violate its aims. So this can, in practice, become a very problematic thing. And there are ways of doing it where if somebody is being perceived by the rest of the circle as being stubborn, I guess, or unwilling to, consent, and it's not felt, and it's felt that they're not making a good faith effort of connecting it to the aims, but it's really because of a personal issue. There are ways that the circle can build in, assuming you build it into your rules, where you can remove someone from the circle temporarily and such. So you can go forward and make decisions. It might also, and might mean that for them to rejoin the circle, then they would have to consent to the positions of the circle. Obviously, that's going to be pretty rare. Usually what happens if there's an objection is it causes people to think and try to figure out a way to meet what that paramount objection is. So it's really important if somebody does object that they have to really provide concrete reasons why and discuss how it's what might mitigate those objections. And usually my experience in dealing with it, if there is a paramount objection that is tied to the aims, it will generally have more than one person making that objection. And so then you go back to the picture forming and trying to figure out what's the core issue that's trying to be addressed, and how do you get maybe a different pathway towards it. So some of the pros and cons, I think in the pros, sociocracy is really good at giving space for everyone to have their voice heard, even though it doesn't necessarily do anything to mitigate, institutional or systemic forms of oppression. Nevertheless, it at least opens up a space so that there is room for people to use their voice. This can ensure buy-in from everyone at the beginning by allowing the forming of the proposal to be democratic, not just the voting on it. And it also allows non-member staff to participate. So if your co-op is going to have some workers who will not be on a pathway to membership, they will still be able to have an inclusive and an agency in their work. The con side is that it might seem slower or more alien to traditional Roberts rules. It does require really strong facilitation skills, so there is a lot of training that needs to go into everyone that's involved. People need to learn this model. It's not something that we're naturally taught. We're naturally taught more of the sort of win-lose model of Roberts rules, where majority rules and you can push through unpopular ideas if you just have enough votes. And so this requires kind of a rethinking of how to do this in a more collaborative way. And so that means member onboarding and ongoing training is really important for sociocracy. So this is an example. This is Blue Scorcher Bakery and Cafe, which is in Astoria, Oregon. And they, I forget all the numbers here, but they're a bakery. So their board of directors, and sometimes now in sociocracy, we replace the phrase board of directors with mission circle, which is seems more aligned with what everything else we're doing, because sociocracy itself is not really, is kind of a tough fit with the corporate laws that are on the books, but here you see the board of directors is elected by the worker owners. The board then chooses the general manager who will end up leading the general circle, but it also has the financial officer that will also be part of the general circle. The general circle then elects a representative up to the board of directors. So on the board is one group elected by the circle of department leads and representatives, and then the others are all represented by the worker owners. In Blue Scotia, they also have outside experts, and this can be somewhat common if the laws in the state allow for outside directors. Usually, this particular group identified 3 specific areas that they believed would be of value to have input from. So I think our very own Diane Gassaway serves as a community director for Blue Scorcher, bringing that co-op expertise into the model, but they have other people as well. Whether or not you want to do this is up to you. That's one would just double check the Washington laws to see what's allowed and see that works. You could also have an advisory board too that might play the same role. So then this gets to the general circle. The general circle is made up of, I think setting this up would be the general manager would effectively pick the initial leads for the different circles, and then each circle elects a representative. And then probably going forward, as people need to be replaced, the general circle fills in the replacements. And so, so each sector, like I said, the bakers is the bread circle. You have chocolate, pastry, front end, the barista and dish, and then cafe and prep. And so each of these are specific because they felt they warranted their own circle. So it could be that at one point pastry and bread were in the same circle, but then maybe enough of growth happened and they decided that there were enough differences between bread and pastry to split them off into their own. Likewise, chocolate was maybe a new thing that might have been a helping circle of some sort and elevated into its own circle as well. And then maintenance, some other circles you could have here might be marketing, right? And or even human personnel management or finances. It would be depending on what you feel it would be valuable. So again, anything that only affects the pastry department, the circle is going to be taught to, and the pastry just has to deal with their own. But if there's something between pastry and bread, for instance, maybe it is sourcing eggs, right? Maybe the flour, they each can do their own flour, but maybe there's a feeling that it's really not efficient to be sourcing different types of eggs, that they just really need to have one set of eggs coming in. Then the general circle might have to make the decision about eggs as opposed to any one of the individual circles doing it. So that's kind of an idea. The general circle might also put some other rules in place, like maybe maybe there's a commitment to organic foods, and so it might require that all the other circles, whatever ingredients they are using, have to privilege or at least try to meet organic standards. So that might be another general circle structure as opposed to any of the individual circles. Okay, so I'm going to just stop here for a second and see if there are any questions about sociocracy or where we're at. And there's kind of a lot to take in. Margaret, did that answer some of your questions, or?
It did.
Okay.
It did. That's a lot clearer than some of the stuff that I've been reading. We're going to work on, putting bylaws together. It's, like my brain is still fixed on board members, Robert's rules of order, and I'm really trying hard to kind of figure out how to not only operationalize this, but how to have really good words to go with it.
Yeah, I think it's important if you do use sociocracy to put that into the bylaws so that it requires a bylaw change if you're going to move away from it. Otherwise, it can be too easy for people to, hit loggerheads and just decide to drop sociocracy and then, and revert back to a majority rule model. But we have some templates that we've toyed around with. Blue Scorchers bylaws are actually very good. They do a very good job of laying it out. And I think they're available on their website. We might have a copy in our shared folder. I'll have to double check.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other?
I had some questions, John.
Yeah, please.
So in that the Blue Scorcher example, it seemed like there were circles for all the like the production operations, but there wasn't like a circle for like the people who are dealing with like renewing the business license or like keeping the books or the more like administrative tasks within the organization. Is that just specific to that example you gave, or are those usually just like officers and not circles, or how's that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's probably specific to Blue Scorcher. So like if I were to map out, say, Union Cab, we would have definitely had an accounts payable circle. We would have had an accounts receivable circle. We would have probably had general business administration circle maybe, or maybe the administration circle might have included AR and AP as part of it, right? So but we were a much bigger organization, so is why that would probably happen. I think for them, it's probably within the. Well, I don't know how their job descriptions are, but it might be just within the job description of some of the positions within the organization that are part of the general circle. But you could definitely split them out into their own model, and I think that's one of the exercises. We have about 45 minutes left, that maybe just to toy around with it is to think what the circles would look like in your organization. And, if you're small, you can just have one circle, right? And just set those out, but you might still want to have at least delineate some subordinate circles, like Orca books, not to tell too many tales out of school, but, their ideas are small. They have a small staff. So, their ideas, rather than making everyone sit in all these different meetings with different names, that they're essentially going to, just have someone be a coordinator for each area that's the circle. And then, other people will join in to help create that. I see Diana's a comment here because, yeah, Diana has a little bit more knowledge. So the admin roles are held by owners and are contained in the board circle.
Do you have circles of just one person, or do you need multiple people to make a circle?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, the idea is what the circle's doing. You probably want, because the circle is ultimately creating the procedure of how you do the work.
Yeah.
So, if only one person's doing the work, maybe then that could just be a particular role that's part of a larger circle. But the idea, I think, is to try to document the jobs too, so that if that person leaves, somebody else can come in and relatively easily figure out what to do. And so think of that as the role of the circle. And then, that might mean that you might want to have at least two people in every circle just to be able to have that documentation and what's the word? Redundancy, like within the organization, so that if somebody does leave, the institutional knowledge stays with the organization.
Sure. And then for like a small organization like ours, would you I'm just like imagining we'd have like a technician circle, and then we'd have the general circle, and there's basically just one person that's not in the technician circle. Well, I guess what I'm asking is, does the general circle only have the delegates, or does it have everyone from all the circles?
Right. So the general circle would include the leader of each circle.
Yeah.
And as well as a delegate from each circle.
So it's not the full full everyone. It's just the leaders and delegates. Okay.
Right. So yeah. So like there might be like 6 bakers at Blue Scorcher, and only 2 of them are in the general circle.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then only 2 of the general circle members are on the board, although there are other board members from the membership circle.
What is the difference between the leader and the delegate then, if they're both on both circles?
So the leader has a fundamental role of making sure that the work of the circle gets done. So that might mean scheduling bakers, right, for the shifts, for the baking shifts. It might mean making sure that the agreed upon policies by the circle are actually implemented. The delegate's role is really more, so also the leader, this I think is, the leader's job is also to report down from above the circle. So the general manager would report from the board circle to the general circle. Then the role of the delegate is to report up. So that when the board is getting the report from the general circle, it's not the leader that gives that report, it's the delegate.
Okay.
But it creates sort of a check and balance too, because if the delegate isn't giving the whole report or is soft pedaling something, the leader can say, well, hold it, that's not entirely complete. And likewise the other way, if the leader's not presenting everything like that the board circle said, the delegates could say, well, we also talked about this too.
Yeah.
Trust but verify. Okay, great.